Throughout my life, I have faced many obstacles. I've seen war, endured losses, and experienced all kinds of pain. But nothing hurt as much as the nightmare that began that morning. When the phone rang, my daughter Ava was weak, injured, and lying in a hospital bed. The truth I uncovered was more horrifying than anything else. My family had been attacked by one of the people I trusted the most. I couldn't forgive the betrayal, and I was ready to do whatever it took to make those who hurt my family pay. This is my story, and this would be the end of their mistakes. I've always been a man of routine. My mornings were the same: coffee, the newspaper, and a few moments of silence before heading to work. But that morning felt off. My coffee was burnt, and I couldn't focus. It was as if I could sense that something was about to go wrong. The sharp ring of the phone broke my uneasy feeling and brought reality crashing down. The caller ID was unfamiliar. When I answered, a cold, clinical voice came through. "Mr. Walker, your daughter Ava is in the emergency room." What emotions gripped me in that moment? I still don't know. Panic, anger, fear? I can't say which one was strongest. All I remember is grabbing my coat, rushing out the door, and starting my truck. Every second on the road filled my mind with worst-case scenarios. My daughter Ava, my little girl. What had happened to her? When I arrived at the hospital, the bright light stung my eyes, but I didn't care. I went straight to the front desk and demanded to know where Ava was. The moment I saw her lying in that hospital bed, my whole world shattered. Her face was bruised, one eye completely swollen shut. She kept her hands hidden under the blanket, as if she didn't want anyone to see her like this. I sat beside her, holding her hands. Even touching her felt like it might cause her more pain. The tears in her eyes broke my heart. "What happened, sweetheart?" I asked. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Daddy, I was home. I came back early from Sarah's. I heard noises upstairs, coming from your bedroom. I crept up quietly to look. Mom and Uncle Rick." Her voice faltered, but she'd already said enough. 23 years of marriage, countless memories, the home we built together. Everything collapsed in an instant, but it wasn't over. "They saw me," Ava continued. "Rick had his men. They threw me down the stairs, then they laughed. 'Drinking your whiskey.' Every word hit me like a bullet. My mother and uncle, my wife and my own blood. Not only had they betrayed me with each other, but they had hurt my daughter and disrespected my home. I stood up, consumed by one thought: they would pay for this. I knew the kind of people Rick was involved with. I'd always suspected his shady dealings. Now I had proof. I pulled out my phone and called an old friend from Kandahar, someone who owed me a favor. "I need everything you can find on Rick Thorne," I said. And I mean everything. At that moment, I made a decision. I am Thomas Walker, and I wouldn't stop until I made them pay for the tears they caused my daughter. Betrayed I may have been, but I was not the kind of man who tolerated betrayal, no matter how dark or dirty it got. I would uncover every secret and destroy the rotten system they had built. When I returned home, everything looked different. This was no longer the place I had called home for 23 years. Every corner, every piece of furniture reminded me of a betrayal. I went upstairs to our bedroom and started looking for evidence of what Ava had described. The bed was unmade. An empty whiskey bottle lay on the floor, the room filled with the stench of cigarette smoke, something I'd never allowed in my house. Their disrespect burned me more with every detail. Rick and Eleanor, wherever they were, must have thought they were safe. Eleanor's face flashed in my mind, the caring wife, the loyal mother she pretended to be. But she had smiled in my face for years while stabbing me in the back. Imagining her in that bed, betraying me, turned my stomach. Who was this woman? Had I been the only one holding this marriage together? The phone rang. I paused for a moment, but answered anyway. "Walker?" said the voice on the other end. "It's time to repay my debt from Kandahar." "Right. You've got the details on Rick Thorne," I said. "He's involved in shady business." deep in a hole. I'll find what you need, but be careful. This guy has connections. If he has connections, I have more, I replied. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was my rules now. The next morning, I started to put my plan into action. I needed to know exactly who Rick was and what he was up to. But first, I had to make sure Ava was safe. I arranged for her to stay with Sarah's family. I wouldn't let her be harmed again. As I said goodbye to her, she looked into my eyes. "Promise me, Dad," she said, her voice cracked but determined. "You won't let this go, will you?" "I promise," I said. "I'll make everyone who hurt you pay." Before going to Rick's house, I reached out to a few of my contacts. I discovered that Rick's men were nothing but hired muscle, two thugs with no purpose other than to serve as hired hands. I was prepared to face them head-on. Every skill I had honed during my military service would now be put to use. But this time, the battleground wasn't some foreign land. It was the very place I once called home. When I arrived at Rick's residence, the loud music and raucous laughter coming from inside were unmistakable. Rick was indulging in my whiskey, throwing a party in my own house. I stepped through the door, my movements silent, but inside me, a storm of fury brewed, ready to explode. I found him in the living room. Eleanor was sprawled on the couch, half drunk, while Rick stood with a drink in hand, laughing like he owned the place. His goons lounged nearby, completely at ease. As soon as I saw them, I clenched my fists. This ends here, I thought. With a cold, unyielding voice, I declared, this ends now. My words sliced through the music like a sharp blade. Rick turned toward me, a smug grin on his face. "Tom, welcome home. But it looks like you're a little too late." That was the moment my pent-up rage unleashed. One of the guards charged at me, but I took him down with a single, fluid motion. The other went for his gun, but I neutralized him before he even had time to aim. Rick's expression drained of color, fear seeping into his face. "You," I said, taking slow steps toward him. "You're going to pay for everything." Eleanor screamed, "Tom, stop, please." But I couldn't stop. The betrayal coursing through my veins kept me moving forward. "How can I trust you, Eleanor?" I asked, not even looking at her. "You and Rick destroyed this family. This is the end for both of you." I grabbed Rick by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "Wasn't it enough that you hurt Ava? Now you're trying to ruin my life too." Rick muttered something, but I wasn't listening. That night was just the beginning of my pursuit of justice. I, Thomas Walker, would never forgive those who endanger my family. Not a single one. The next day, I dialed up my old friend Mac. "You won't believe what I've got," I said, and I knew he could hear the fire in my voice. Our conversation was short but direct. I needed Mac's connections to expose Rick's financial web. I was going to follow the money and track every illegal transaction back to him. While Mac worked on his end, I began my own investigation. I managed to track down one of Rick's bodyguards and confront him. The moment they hurt Ava, they sealed their own fate. Meeting with the guard was part of my strategy, and I was able to extract crucial information about Rick's shady operations. I recorded everything. With this, I now had enough to unravel Rick's empire. I compiled all the evidence and set my plan into motion. I prepared files to send to Rick's business associates, his clients, and the very people protecting him. These files would expose the true extent of his criminal activities. Once that truth was out, Rick would have nowhere left to hide. By the end of the day, I returned home and sat by Ava's side. She was still recovering from the trauma, but I assured her, everything is being handled. No one will ever hurt you again. She gazed up at me with those innocent eyes of hers. "I believe in you, Dad," she said. Those words were all the reassurance I needed. I knew I was doing the right thing. Rick, Eleanor, and their corrupt network crumbled bit by bit. Rick's wealth and reputation were obliterated. Eleanor vanished, retreating into her own isolation, abandoning her past. But for me, this wasn't just about revenge. It was a lesson. To everyone who had tried to bring me down, they learned one undeniable truth. You can't destroy Thomas Walker. Because I don't just survive, I bury my enemies.